Welcome back to TLDR's daily briefing for Wednesday, the 11th of June, 2025. In today's episode, we cover the first Western sanctions on Israeli ministers, the US-China trade truce, and the Polish government's confidence vote. But first, protests continue over federal immigration raids in the US. Protests against federal immigration raids have continued in cities across the US, as the White House mobilized 4,000 National Guard troops to protect government buildings across the country. On Tuesday night, the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, declared a partial curfew from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. in downtown LA, which will last for several days. It comes after a fifth day of street protests in the city, which saw 197 people arrested on Tuesday. The protests, which began largely peacefully, have in some instances turned violent, with rioting, looting, and clashes between police and protesters. Elsewhere on Tuesday, Texas's Republican Governor Greg Abbott also said that he will deploy the National Guard this week ahead of planned protests, adding that they will use every tool and strategy to help law enforcement maintain order. Cities including Austin, New York, Atlanta, and Chicago, as well as Los Angeles, have seen protests against Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, raids that have targeted locations where suspected undocumented migrants are living or working. The ongoing crisis has also pitted Trump against California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom, who is widely viewed as preparing for a presidential run in 2028. On Monday, Newsom confirmed that California will sue the Trump administration over its deployment of the National Guard, calling the move illegal and unconstitutional. Newsom also claimed that Trump had manufactured a crisis and said in a speech on Tuesday, "What we're witnessing is not law enforcement, it's authoritarianism." The saga has sparked an intense debate about the president's use of the military to police its own citizens. The National Guard has not been deployed by a president without the request of the state governor since the 1960s, when it was used to force public schools in America's southern states to desegregate students. Trump's federalization of the National Guard and deployment of Marines this week also comes ahead of a planned military parade on Saturday, Trump's 79th birthday, at an estimated cost of $45 million. You're listening to TLDR's Daily Briefing. If you want more explainers on what's happening in the world, then you should check out TLDR's other channels. Today, we released videos on Reform UK moving left economically, and an episode of our podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard. You can find those videos linked in the description or show notes for this episode, or by searching for TLDR on YouTube or Nebula. The UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Norway have imposed sanctions on two Israeli government ministers, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, largely for inciting violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. They are the first Western sanctions against ministers from Israel. As a result of the sanctions, Finance Minister Smotrich and National Security Minister Ben-Gvir are banned from travelling to the 5 Western countries, and any assets in said countries will be frozen. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are influential members of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet and are perhaps the most extreme ministers in his government. In a joint statement, the 5 countries said, "Settler violence is incited by extremist rhetoric which calls for Palestinians to be driven from their homes, encourages violence and human rights abuses, and fundamentally rejects the two-state solution." The statement also urges the Israeli government to take meaningful action to end extremist, violent, and expansionist rhetoric. Both Israel and the United States condemned the move, with the Israeli government saying that the cabinet would meet next week to respond to the sanctions. In other news, the United States and China have agreed to a framework deal that extends the truce in their trade war. After 2 days of talks in London, building on a previous agreement in Geneva last month, US President Donald Trump said the two countries' negotiators had reached a deal, subject to final agreement by himself and Chinese President Xi. One of the key points of tension has been China's restrictions on its exports of critical minerals and the US's restrictions on semiconductor exports. Neither side has released any specifics of the deal. However, Trump claimed on Truth Social that the deal meant, quote, "full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied upfront by China," adding that the US would meet its commitments, including, quote, "Chinese students using our colleges and universities." US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said the agreement would ease the respective minerals and semiconductor restrictions in a balanced way. Analysts have noted, however, that the deal does not settle the trade relationship between the US and China, but rather is mostly just a return to the already tense state of affairs from before April the 2nd. And finally, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk faces a confidence vote in Parliament today, a week and a half after his candidate suffered defeat at the country's presidential election to the right-wing opposition. Tusk is expected to win the vote, and he called for it himself to give his government a fresh start after the presidential election. In trying to rally his coalition, he said, "Each of us in this room knows the taste of victory and the bitterness of defeat, but I don't know the word surrender." And he urged the governing parties to mobilise to win the 2027 parliamentary elections. The victory of the nationalist opposition Law and Justice candidate, Karol Nawrocki, scuppered Tusk's hopes of getting an ally in the presidential office to help with his reform agenda, and he now has to contend with another 2.5 years of an unfriendly president who wields crucial veto powers. That's all for today. We'll be back with you tomorrow, so make sure you're subscribed wherever you listen. In the meantime, you can check out the latest episode of our podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard, where we discuss which heads of government are doing well and who's doing badly every week. You can find the link in the podcast description. This was a TLDR news production hosted by Georgina Findlay, written by Georgina Findlay and Rory Taylor, and produced by Scarlett Watchorn. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back again tomorrow.